I just want to take a moment before I start and say what an amazing day this has been. I was planning on spending the second part of the session backstage rehearsing my speech, and I just couldn't. It was just so amazing hearing, people of all different ages talking about the young people in Ireland today. So I want to say thank you to the young people, for all of you who have put so much hard work into doing this, and to Mairead and her team for encouraging them in it. We give them a round of applause. Four or 5 years ago, I was living in Barcelona. I just moved there, I was quite young. I was in the country 2 months, and my dad came over to visit me. And I introduced him to a friend of mine from West Africa. And when my dad walked away, my friend came over to me and he said, "Keren, you've just introduced me to your dad." And I thought, oh God, what have I done? And I said, and he goes, "Well, don't you mind?" "Mind what? Does your dad not mind that I'm black?" It knocked me back. I could feel myself being punched in the face. How is it that in the 21st century, in Europe, we live in a society where somebody thinks that my parent would have a problem with me having a friend with a different colour skin? Going back 2 months to that, when I arrived in the country, within 2 weeks, I'd met my boyfriend. Young, naive and carefree, I quickly fell in love. To my parents' dismay, I was living with him in a matter of months. We lived in what I could describe as a cultural ghetto. Coming from a middle-class background, I thought this was really cool. I was like, get a slumber with the lads, do something interesting. Couldn't wait to try something different. What I remember a few months later was hearing these concepts around racism. It still got me. I couldn't fully connect with it. But what I remember was walking down the street and people looking at me when I was with my boyfriend. I would walk into a shop and the energy would shift. There was a silence that came over the supermarket. At first, I thought it was funny. In fact, I'd kind of move a little bit closer to him when it would happen to be like, ha ha. But you know what? Over the course of months, it just wasn't funny anymore. Every stare, whether racist or not, was felt through my body. I wish I could tell you that this is a story about how I found my inner strength, about how I realized that it wasn't me and it was them and it was their issue, and how I found my peace. But it isn't. This is a story about how I began to lose myself. I began to lose my identity. And piece by piece, day by day, I disconnected from society. And the more I disconnected from society, the more that I disconnected from myself. And this is the reality. This is the reality for the 200 people who lived in the same cultural ghetto as me. Friends, family, the people that became my new home. We would eat together. We would laugh together. They were friends. They were nice people. I could tell you so many good things about these people. The security they gave me as a young person living in another country without my family. But then they would walk outside. They would walk outside and they would become arrogant. They would become rude. I didn't want to spend my time with them in public. I didn't want to be associated with these people. Because once they left their home, once they left the security of their walls, they got defensive. And I sat and I would think, why can't they see that it's not them? Why can't they be comfortable in their own skin? But then when I left the house, I became defensive. I became arrogant. Because when you do not belong to the community that is around you, you lose your sense of self. You lose your capacity to care. I would walk down the street and I would litter. I, the 14-year-old who walked down the street with a plastic bag in my hand, picking up the rubbish from the street, was now littering. And even though I knew it was wrong, and even though I knew it affected the society around me and affected the globe, I didn't have the capacity to care. That was gone in me. These are the dangers of ghettoization. I'm not talking about the American ghettos in the Bronx where you have crime. I'm talking about where you have different cultures living within a closed-off community, disconnected from their society. 2 years later, I moved back to Ireland, and luckily for me, I came back to a community that wanted me. And by doing that, I was able to pick up the pieces from my life. But I was aware of this new issue, and I suppose what was really shocking for me again was coming back to the fact that this is in Europe. This is not in some foreign country that I was told has lots of problems, but this is happening in my continent. And re-entering Irish society, it gave me a new lens, I suppose. And I think it's only when we re-enter a situation can we begin to see our society from a different perspective. But I still felt like Ireland wasn't at the kind of stage that Barcelona was at. And I started talking to my friend about how is it that in this day and age, things like racism still exist. My friend, who's from a minority ethnic background, laughed and recounted many stories where in my country and my town, the society of Céad Míle Fáilte had told her to go home to her own country. The girl who had been educated in Irish society from a child. The girl who went to college here was told to go home to her own society. So I began to look at what could I do? What could I do about this? Now that I knew, now that I saw the fact that a European-wide research identified Ireland as the 6th worst country with regards to racial discrimination for sub-Saharan Africans, and the society that has 75% of children from migrant backgrounds populated into 25% of schools. And I began to see that what I experienced in Spain, the cycle where people were defensive because of the racism, which reinforced the racist opinion, which reinforced defensiveness, that this was a cycle that was going to affect Ireland. And that if we don't do something now, cultural ghettoization is a reality that not just my children will face, but my nieces and nephews who are already 6. This is a reality that they're going to be facing in their lifetime if we do not look at this now. Because as the ex-CEO of the Integration Centre put it, segregation is like a scrambled egg. Once it is scrambled, it is impossible to undo. So I founded my social enterprise, BlueFire, that looks at integration through the arts. So we work with different cultures, we engage them through community engagement, we bring them together and celebrate cultural diversity. We celebrate our differences, we celebrate our commonality. It's all run by our young people, which is one of the reasons I'm so inspired to be here today. And it's great. Our young people last year brought 10,000 people into Smithfield Square in celebration of cultural diversity. We were delighted. But you know what I'm learning? I'm learning that the biggest challenge is starting with me. As CEO of an integration organisation, I heard about this thing called the implicit association test. It's a test that looks at the unconscious mind. Thinking with my job, I'm not going to be racist. There's nothing going on in that mind. I decided I was going to do this test and see, did I have any racism? Completing the test, proud to get my results, only to find out that I have a slight preference to white people over black. I couldn't believe it. But what was more shocking, although a little relieving, was that 94% of the 14 million people who have sat this test have a preference towards a specific race. So this is something our unconscious biases, our unconscious prejudices, is something that so many people have. There's 100 people in this room, so 94 of you have a preference towards one race over another. What does that mean? Does that mean we sit here and say we're all racist? No. It means tune in to your racism. Tune in. When are you going into a situation? When are you walking into a room with a new group? Are you leaning towards one race over another? When you meet someone new, is there a part of you that just pulls back that little bit? Ask yourself, why is that? I know for me, growing up in a society for many years that spoke about Africa as one country, I developed a very narrow mind about what Africa is. Luckily, our media over the past number of years has begun to move from that space and begin to represent Africa as a very diverse continent. Fortunately, last year we did have Band Aid that once again asked if a continent of diverse religions know it's Christmas time. But moving on from that, our media have begun to see the continent as slightly more diverse. So while my brain can now connect and my brain can begin to see that my view of Africa is not the view of the reality, my unconscious mind hasn't quite caught up with me. This is my reasons as to why I believe I have a slight preference towards white people over black. And you know what's amazing? I now know it. So when I meet somebody who's black and I notice myself doing something, that little thing that might pull back, that little thing that reacts differently, that part of me that mightn't fully trust, I can challenge myself. I can challenge myself to be better. Social sciences recognize that upon a second of meeting somebody upon a second of meeting someone new, we categorize them into race, age, sex, ethnicity. It's our human nature to categorize people, but it's our humanity that can rise above it. So while there are great organizations doing amazing work in this field, it starts with us. It starts with you, and it starts with me. Notice when you have a preconceived prejudice. Notice when you're making an assumption. Notice. And if you think that you can't change that, if you think that you noticing it and you changing your behavior and you genuinely changing how you're interacting and beginning to challenge yourself so that you can lose your prejudices, if you think the power of one isn't enough, I remember my auntie 10 years ago recycling. And I asked her, why bother? Nobody recycles, the schools don't do it, no one does it, none of the rest of the family do it. She said, if I recycle, maybe I'll encourage one other person to cycle. Now most of our country recycles. Thank you.